I'm Janna King, and this is the stories behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Janna King.
Well, happy spring, everybody, and welcome to the Author Stories Podcast. If you go to hankgarner.com, we've got a new site design I think you're going to like. It's easier to dig through all of the archives of the show. And as always, there's a little search box on the right-hand side and a box where you can sort them in a long list, and you can find an author interview that you like. Also, subscribe to the show. There are buttons over there in the right-hand sidebar as well. If you would like to support the show, there is a link in the right-hand sidebar where you can donate to the show. If you'd like to drop something in the Author Stories tip jar, there's also a link in the top sidebar where if you would like to advertise your product or service in the show, you can do that as well. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please click on the Amazon links in the show notes and support the authors that come on, and we do appreciate it. After our great author interview today, stay tuned at the end of the show for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Hey authors, you need an editor in your life, and not just an editor, but an editor that understands you and gets what you're trying to accomplish. That's why you need to visit my good friend Scott Woodley at marlowemoss.net and let him take a look at your work. He'll give you a free sample edit. Scott can help you be the best writer you can be. Visit him at marlowemoss.net. Inspired sentences and polished paragraphs for print-worthy books at competitive rates and always on time. Offering a full range of editorial and ghostwriting services to self-published and traditionally published authors. Turn your ideas into words and see your dreams become books. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Janna King on the show with me. Janna has a brand new book called The Seasonaires, and it is phenomenal. I think you guys are really going to love it. It's available now. It's been out for just a couple of days, and I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Janna. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be talking to you.
Well, thank you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory is my mom giving me a journal and a pencil when I was about 12, and I got on my bike and I rode to this little park down my street, and I sat and I wrote in my journal. And from that point on, I wanted to be a writer since I was 12. I never wanted to do anything else except be a mom, which thankfully also happened. But that's my first memory of wanting to be a writer.
I love that. I've heard so many stories of people that have a definitive moment like that. And it usually, or a lot of times it comes from a teacher or a parent, and it's usually a very simple act on the adult's part of gifting that kid with something to unleash the creativity. And I think a lot of times adults don't even realize what they're doing and what a life-changing moment that is. But thank God for those people and what they do.
Oh, it was amazing. And interestingly enough, it's Teacher Appreciation Week this week, and I pulled up pictures of two of my teachers from high school, and they had such a huge influence. They were both very different. One, Miss O'Brien, was very strict, extremely strict, and as a matter of fact, she had a rule that you are never supposed to write in your pajamas. You're never supposed to work in your pajamas. You're always supposed to get dressed and actually sit at a desk. And I never forgot that particular philosophy. And I had another teacher that I loved, Miss Gilbert, and she was inspirational too. So this week gave me a minute to just appreciate the teachers that inspired me and helped me become a writer.
Love that so much. So you never wanted to do anything but be a writer and a mom. What do you do when you're grown and you leave school? How do you start pursuing that dream?
I got my first degree in English at UCLA, and then I went on to film school. And at film school, I wrote my first screenplay because I actually started writing in television and film, mostly television. And with my master's degree, I actually ended up as a receptionist at a studio, and there just made really great contacts. And I ended up having that script optioned by a producer who helped me develop it. It was never made, but it was very instrumental. And from there, I just continued to write spec scripts, which were just sample scripts of shows. And I worked with producers and as like a glorified secretary, basically, in development. And that's how I started. I just kept writing sample scripts and ended up getting assignments from those.
When did the desire to write for screen come about?
I think I'd always loved movies. I remember very early on, interestingly enough, creating like original children's shows and putting them on in my garage and with puppets. And I did start out writing in 1-hour drama television, but then I kind of segged into kids animation. So it's really funny. That's also a very early memory, is writing these scripts for kids shows, because I always loved Electric Company and Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. I loved those shows. So I really remember writing those kinds of scripts. And then I just loved TV. I mean, I always loved books as well, but this is a new foray. Writing novels is new for me. So that's really where it began.
I think the Electric Company was a life-changing experience for me.
Yeah, amazing show.
Yes,
amazing.
It was. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So you're working in the industry and kind of learning the ropes and learning how the machinery of it all works. And I think a lot of us that do not work in that industry probably have no idea of the layers upon layers of the stuff you have to go through just to get a script, optioned or much less made. What do you think that you learned about storytelling, working in that environment and how to navigate in that industry?
I think patience is one of the most important qualities to have, and also to have a thick skin, because you really have to be able to take notes and at the same time kind of stick to your guns if you have story points that you're really passionate about. But when it comes to telling stories for film or TV or books for that matter, I really think that I learned very quickly to stop trying to figure out what everybody else wanted and write what was interesting to me and what I felt was compelling. Because every time I tried to guess, this is popular, I'm hearing this is the next newest thing, it always, like, the results just weren't the same as when I felt really passionate about something or really fascinated with a particular subject or a character. And oftentimes, for example, I wrote a spec script about professional mourners, and the lead character in it was just compelling to me because I wanted to write not about like the ingenue, I wanted to write about the best friend. So for me, that was the most interesting thing about that story, is to kind of get into what the secondary character would normally be, but I just found her so much more interesting. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really finding something that you are passionate about, and because is that because it's fruitless to try to predict trends and people that are doing that are just chasing their tail, or is it because when you find something that you love and you're passionate about, the love and passion comes through in the script, and if you love it, then obviously someone else will. Is there what do you think it is about when you finally realize that then you start breaking through?
I do think that there are people who can absolutely put their finger on the pulse of what's going on, and they can write amazing things that are like that. And you hope that I had an agent at one point that called it lightning in a bottle, that, you have to basically catch lightning in a bottle to get something actually made where everything comes together and then it happens. I do think that there are a host of people that can do that, knowing what the trends are. But I know that if I'm going to live with a story or live with characters, and that's what happens. I mean, they're my world for however long it takes for me to write something. If that's the case, I really, really have to be into them. And that means that I, have to go with my gut as opposed to just guessing what I think is going to be successful or what somebody tells me is going to be successful. Because that's one of the most fun parts of writing, is living with these characters and seeing where they go and what do they do and what do they say to each other. You have to really be excited about living with them for a good period of time. So I think that that's when the material that I feel is my best material comes out, when I'm, really passionate about the characters. And that can be anything, I still write for Kids TV. I love it. That could be anything from writing about, fantasy dragons to writing about brand ambassadors in Nantucket. It really runs the gamut. It just has to be something that feels interesting and exciting and compelling to me.
And you did go on to do a lot of writing in that industry, and children's television, not only that, but Lifetime and Hallmark Channel, and a number of things. What was the desire to write this novel?
I always wanted to write a book. I think just the nature of being a freelance writer, I'm always so happy to be working. So I have kept busy working in television, and it never presented itself in this way until this concept sort of fascinated me, and it seemed perfect for a book. And I knew that eventually I would want to try to write a book, as challenging and amazing as that was. I knew that eventually I would do it. It just was not what I did first, and those weren't the opportunities that came to me in the beginning.
I would think that writing for screen, television or movies or what have you, would be a very collaborative process. I would think the beginning of it is very solitary, like writing a novel, but at some point a lot of other people get involved in the process, and the thing that you made when we actually see it on the screen may be different than you originally envisioned it. Whereas then writing a novel is an extremely solitary process, and then usually after that you have an editor or two that are in on the editing process, and maybe a couple of beta readers, but before the world at large sees the book, it's been in very few hands. What was your experience going from something that I would think is very collaborative to the very solitary process of writing a novel?
It was mildly terrifying, to be perfectly honest, because you do stand or fall on your own, basically.
Right.
And when you're working on a project, a TV whether it's TV or film, it's collaborative, or plays. I've written plays as well. It's a collaborative effort, and for better, for worse, everybody sort of takes responsibility for the end result. So sitting down, I do have to say, I love the process of just putting my head down and writing and being kind of a hermit in that way and living in the world. So that part was very similar. And I there's little that I love more than that. But then the process of knowing that it was coming out and it was pretty much just me was scary, was anxiety producing and also exciting at the same time, but definitely both.
Tell us about the Seasonaires. Where did the idea for this book come from, and when did you know that this was going to be something different? This was not going to be a screenplay, but this was a story that you would sit down and completely envision in a book.
I had been chatting with my agent and my book agent, and he had heard about this phenomenon of brand ambassadors and seasonaires. And I thought that this whole world was extremely fascinating. The idea that these young people get paid to go to these beautiful places on earth and just party and wear great clothes and hang out and post on social media on behalf of their brands, whether it be clothing or sports equipment or liquor. It was just a fascinating arena, and I ended up doing research. And in addition, I have my family background is in the fashion industry. My ex-husband, who I'm still friends with, was in the fashion industry, and he had brand ambassadors. So it was something I was able to do, some research on, and it became even more interesting. And to me, this sort of perfect world was a great venue for things to just kind of fall apart. And I kind of went at it from that, sort of that angle, that this picture of perfection and what really happened underneath, for me, presented a great world for a suspenseful plot.
Right. The main characters of the book are millennials, and I think this is a very much a millennial phenomenon. And if it weren't for social media and a lot of the technology that we have now, maybe this wouldn't be the way it is. But what did you do to connect with the millennial generation so that you could tell this story authentically? And what maybe surprised you about this whole world?
Well, I have two millennials or young people in my life. My son is 19 and my daughter is 21. My son's a little bit younger than quote unquote millennials, but my daughter is going on 22. And so, the world of young people, and I'm extremely close with both of them. Their world is very, very familiar to me. And we talk a lot about what's going on with social media and everything else for that matter. So I felt like I was coming from a place where I had a good connection with that generation. Interestingly enough, my son is not on social media at all. My daughter is. And so it was interesting to get both of their points of view. I mean, he barely is on Facebook, maybe for his classes, but he's not interested. And my daughter is more so. And then some of her friends, being from, that generation, are, they're virtually obsessed with social media. So there was a lot of conversation there. And then I did a lot of research, and I know, just in my life, influencers who are very active on social media. So I just did my due diligence and researched this whole phenomenon. And I'm on social media, not in that same way, but it was part of how I researched, for my characters and the particular topics, approached in the book.
Right. I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with social media. I understand that it's, it's essential to connect with people, and when you're promoting a book or a podcast or whatever else you're doing, you have to go where people are, and I've made some really great friends on social media, and some people I've never met in person, yet I talk to all the time, and we have real legitimate relationship. But it's a very strange thing, for someone in his mid-40s to depend on this technology so much. And I look at my kids, and it's just an extension of who they are. What did that mindset bring to the characters for you? Not just the idea of these brand ambassadors, but the way they interact with each other and with the technology. Did that play a crucial role in the writing?
It did on a host of levels. I mean, with this group of 6, brand ambassadors, there is a competition to have the most followers and get the most attention on social media. And in fact, the way that this fictional clothing brand works, Lyndon Wyld works, is that the seasonaire with the most followers gets to come back the next year. So there is a sense of competition that is already there. I think there is a lot of competition in social media. People, wanting eyes on their lives, basically. And so that helps create conflict between my characters. And at the same time, I'm fascinated with the indelible aspect of what goes out on social media. And once it's out there, who knows who sees it? Even if you try to take it off with Snapchat, Snapchat supposedly disappears after a certain period of time. But if somebody takes a screen grab of something that you posted, it could, who knows how long or how far that image can go. And I, as a storyteller and wanting to write a book that was suspenseful, I felt like, what is in those images that could relate to this mystery that happens in the book, and what can you catch? And I tried to drop in, Easter eggs at certain points that would come around later. And that's fascinating to me too, is what people are posting. If you look in the background, what's in the background, who's in the background? And for me, that was a fun way to explore the mystery aspect of the story. So it was twofold. It was, the competition between the characters and them having the pressure of posting all the time, these very curated, aspirational life posts, and also, the dangers of what you're putting out there. So both those aspects were in the forefront of my mind when I was writing the book.
It's a really interesting cast of characters, not just from the aspect of what they do for a living or, for their career, but varied from where they come from and their kind of station in life. What was that like building these characters? You got the Southern Beauty Queen, you've got Mia from Boston. So you've got these differing characters coming together. Did that add to the tension and help to build the mystery of the book?
The characters came to me pretty much immediately. I mean, I don't know how that happened, but I just knew who they were from the very beginning, and who I wanted these 6 brand ambassadors to be. Writing character and dialogue is the most fun for me. And I think at least for me, I have to be able to relate to all of them in some way, even characters who have traits that are, not necessarily positive. It's a way to explore, my own flaws and things that happen to me in my background, and kind of, examine human nature on a host of levels. So each of the characters are very different, but in all of the characters, there was a little bit of me somewhere in there, which sounds very narcissistic when I hear myself say it out loud, but it really does help when you're writing to be able to relate to somebody's plight. And part of what was really important to me was that, because these characters are putting a very curated image on social media, it was really important for me to show in the book that no one is who they seem, and that people oftentimes want to put out a particular image, but what is underneath is so much more complex, and that everybody, we're all messy in some ways, and, I'm messy in a host of ways, and that to me makes it I wanted readers to be able to relate to all the characters, even the characters that you might not love in the beginning, because, of something that perhaps happened in their background or challenges that they've gone through. There just were things that came out as the story unfolded that I felt gave them depth, or I hope gave them depth.
We've kind of skirted around it as we've talked, but we've got these the Seasonaires, the brand ambassadors. They're from differing pasts and places. What is the thing that ties them together? The mystery of this book.
There is a murder that happens in the beginning. I definitely don't want to give too much away,
right.
But
that's why I was trying to be cagey in the asking, so you could tell what you were comfortable with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's very, if you open the book, you're going to discover that this murder does happen, and the mystery plays out. It is a whodunit and what happened, and there's reasons for everybody to take issue with everybody else. That was my hope in writing the book, that everybody had a beef with everybody else, basically, so that there was a compelling whodunit aspect to the book. It is a coming, I feel like it is a coming of age story that's wrapped in this murder mystery. So that's kind of what ties the plot together, I would say, and all these relationships ultimately.
Murder mysteries are one of the most enduring and endearing pieces of literature. All the way back to Agatha Christie. We've had the 100th anniversary of Murder on the Orient Express, and there's just something about taking a group of people, placing a dead body in their midst, and then watching how they will do everything to tear each other apart, or the bonds that are made over that, or the divisions that are driven through that, and the human drama that plays out when people start accusing each other. And even though this is a very modern and fresh setting, the mechanics of what's going on underneath is a very tried and true literary tradition. Was that something conscious when you were writing?
I don't know if it was conscious, but I do love those stories. I love movies that are, television that I watch is, I love stories that are, have murder, suspense involved, and who done it. Those are all very exciting, fun things to watch and read. And this just seemed like from the very beginning, it just seemed like a perfect venue to have a murder occur in this perfect setting with these kids who are a picture of perfection, for something to just go really wrong. And it just from the start, that's how I wanted to approach the story. So that was definitely conscious. And at the same time, I love those types of stories in film, TV, and books. So those definitely inspired me while I was writing this, for sure.
And it's something that most of us never will experience. The dead body and the whodunit nature. I think it's just great fun to kind of live vicariously through these other people's struggle and pain.
Well, I always feel so weird. I have to say, I always feel so bizarre saying, if I'm talking about a story that's exciting, that's based on a murder, saying, right. This is so juicy and fun. And then I think, that sounds terrible. This is a murder and it's not supposed to be fun. Like, that's a horrible, thing to say. But at the same time, it is entertainment. It is fiction. And it is the kind of thing that, we don't normally go through. I have to say the way my mind, I have, I spin stories in my head. So on a daily basis, I walk around and, kind of make things up as they go on. If I'm in a situation or something happens, I can spin it in my head completely out of control, in order to, kind of almost like experience that in my mind. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely.
That's how my storytelling mind works, just on a daily basis, really.
And then you're telling people how juicy this is, and they're like, Janna, you write children's television. Get it together.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And there have been times where I have been writing very grown up things while I'm on assignment doing preschool television. But I've really always liked that. I mean, when I first started writing, I was told, oh, you can't do that. Like you have to, be a brand, and you have to figure out exactly the genre that you want to write in. And I love that as time has progressed, that there are all these creatives that work in a host of different genres, and, everything from film to TV to music, that there aren't those limitations, because I feel like, especially as a writer, if a story is interesting or a character is interesting, why should it matter if it's a comedy or a drama or a kid's thing? It really has to do with what kind of sparks your passion for writing that piece. And that always bothered me when I'll never forget when somebody said that to me, like, oh, you can't. You have to pick one area that you want to write in, and I don't agree with that.
I like your answer. I think I think there's a maybe in writing novels, that it's sometimes readers don't want to follow you if you genre jump or things like that. But at the end of the day, if you're not happy with what you're writing, I think people are much more likely to follow you if they love you and what you do than if they're in love with your genre. So some of the advice that people give about, staying, make sure you stay with what people know you for. I think that's a kind of a load of bunk in the big picture.
Yeah, I absolutely feel that way. And I mean, let me add, it's not always successful. I mean, I don't think I could write science fiction to save my life. That doesn't mean I won't ever try to do it. I think part of being a writer is experimenting and maybe not always looking at the end result, but the process. When we start writing because we love to write, and maybe it's just going to stink at the end, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with giving it a go. I mean, I don't think I'm going to ever write science fiction. That's not my thing. But I think if somebody, gets inspired to do that, there's nothing wrong with trying at all.
Right. And the worst thing that's going to happen is you learn something about yourself something about the storytelling process along the way, and you can always chalk that up to writing experience.
100%. It's absolutely, all the experiences are learning experiences.
That's
Even the
right.
ones that you feel like are failures are absolutely learning experiences.
Those are probably the most important ones.
Yes, definitely. I mean, they don't feel good when they're happening, but
no, absolutely not. But a little hindsight, really, really helps that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So how long did it take you to write this novel? You're used to writing, I would imagine, on a pretty consistent schedule. If you're especially writing television, there are schedules that have to be kept and deadlines that have to be met. When you're writing a novel like this and you don't have someone breathing down your neck, first, how long did it take you, and how did you keep the train on the tracks while you pursued this?
I actually wrote it. It was a pretty efficient process. I mean, it was going to be a summer book, so it was something that did have to be done in a certain time frame.
Right.
So I did have a deadline for finishing. The way I went about the process initially was getting a certain amount of words out to just get it on the page. And when I work on screenplays, I know this sounds really gross, but I have another a really good friend who would call it the vomit draft, and you just have to get it out. You
Right.
just get it out. And a lot of times we get stuck because we don't want it to be just terrible, whatever comes out. But it always feels good to have the first draft done and then to go back in. So it was a lot like that with the book, was to just get the words out and the story out, and then go back and really hone in on edits, in the editing process. But it was a pretty intensive process for me.
Well, I've talked to some people that talk about spending 2 or 3 years, on a first draft, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what were you doing during that time? Because it sounds to me like you were doing everything but writing a book. If it takes 3 years to get a story out, you're probably playing more golf than you are writing, because you have to be actively not trying to write to take 3 years to write a first draft.
This did not take me 3 years to write.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not I'm actually I'm pretty good on a deadline. I put a lot of, I was thinking this week, I'm a really, really difficult boss. I mean, being a freelancer for as long as I have been, I'm kind of a taskmaster, which is not to say that I don't get distracted. I do, and I have a tendency to online shop. If I'm going to distract myself, I like to put items in shopping carts and then leave the shopping carts online, like shoes and ladies' clothes. I mean, that's my thing. I have a lot of carts that have a bunch of stuff that I don't buy it, but I just abandon. But I really am very disciplined in the way that I write. My kids left for college. They were gone. Both of them were gone last year, and it made it a lot easier for me to not get up during the day. I mean, my husband would say that he would leave in the morning and then he'd come home from work and I would be in the same place. I work in the same place every day. I have lots of pretty places to write and places in my neighborhood. I sit at my desk and I just get it done, which again doesn't mean that I don't, sometimes find a way to distract myself if I'm having a hard time, but I'm pretty diligent about the process.
Are there any specific tools that you use for writing because you are a daily writer and you're always working on something? Is there maybe a piece of software or certain types of notebooks or things like that you find are critical to your process? I
have notebooks that I keep mostly for just, more practical notes. I mean, for script writing, I've always used Final Draft, which is great. And for the book, I used Microsoft Word. I have to say that I am so lame when it comes to it's not lame. It's just I'm really stuck in my ways. Like my kids and my husband show me shortcuts on my laptop, and I will never use the shortcuts. Like I'm just not going to do it. I do it the long way. You're not going to make me do that. I'm never going to learn how to do it. And those are really the programs that I use the most. It's Final Draft for my scripts, and then Microsoft Word for the books. What I did find was enormously helpful, and this sounds so weird and crazy, is I really have to exercise, because if I don't, I will, melt into my chair basically. And I really have to do that on a daily basis. And I would be, we have an elliptical, I'd be on the elliptical, and I would actually talk out chapters. And I would feel like whatever was coming out might have sounded so dumb, and it didn't, might not have worked, but it ultimately was, at certain times in this writing process, was hugely helpful. And so I would do it in my notes on my phone, and then I would transcribe everything onto the page. And it was really helpful to just get it out, because a lot of times if I'm just typing it, I find that I'm much, I censor myself a lot more than if I just talking out what I feel like is going to happen. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I know a lot of people that write like that by transcribing it and doing the voice dictation. But I really like what you said, that when you're typing, you tend to censor yourself, and when you're dictating it, you don't. I don't guess I've heard someone talk about that benefit before. Is it just because there's a certain disconnect when you're dictating, that it doesn't feel like the same as when you're typing, that maybe those walls have been put up through that typing process throughout the years, and just switching that frees you up creatively in a different way? Why do you think that is?
I don't know exactly what it is. This is the first time I've ever done the dictation, that used dictation as a tool. So it was really new to me to do it. But I think that it's wanting to get something perfect on the page when I'm typing. Whereas if I'm just
you can
talking,
see the words. Right.
And then the words might not look right, or the sentence doesn't look right, or it shouldn't be the sentence, or maybe it's posed before, or whatever. You just have to, at least for me, I had a tendency to be more critical, and sometimes it would take time away from the process, because I would just get stuck in feeling like, oh, I don't know where I'm going, and this doesn't sound right to me. But when I was chatting it out, it almost felt silly in a way, and because it felt silly, there was something very freeing about it. So I would do I would have my characters say things to each other, and it just, I didn't use everything, but then I had all this material, and then going back in and seeing, oh, this actually does work, or I could fix this. I happen to love the editing process, and going back in, it's like a great puzzle for me. So I think dictating and getting out this, just kind of getting it all out, and then going back in and sort of sculpting it, made it more fun, and it moved the process along at times when I felt like I might be stuck just trying to type it in, at first.
Well, Janna, now that the book is out, the Seasonaires, what are you working on now? Are you working on more television? Are you writing a follow-up novel? What's coming up next?
I'm, thinking about the next novel right now. I would be thrilled to continue writing novels. I'm working on a kids show, an animated series, Wacky Races, which was a show in the 70s that they rebooted, I think it was last year. So I've been doing some episodes of that. and coming up with some TV concepts as well, and working on some spec scripts at the same time. And I also recently produced a short film with my daughter, an animated short film with her. So I just kind of have my hands in everything, just try to keep busy. That's my goal.
I love it. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of the Seasonaires. This is a really tight thriller mystery that, like, you've not read before, I promise. But Janna, where can people find you online if they want to find out more about you and follow along with your work?
I have a website. It's www.janna with two N's -king.com, and the book is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, IndieBound. I'm also on Goodreads, and I'm on Instagram. I love when people find me on Instagram, I do have to admit, and Twitter and Facebook. So I love when people make contact. It's been really, really fun in that way.
Excellent. We'll put links to all that in the show notes to this episode. You can find them all at hankgarner.com. Janna, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was great. I really appreciate all your questions. They were amazing.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
He led Jason to a small bistro. The door set tiny bells to chime as they entered. The place shivered with smells. Coffee, hot chocolate, and croissants. "This," he said, extending his arm towards a woman in an apron, "is Jennifer. She makes the best scones and is tragically spoken for." He kissed the woman's hand. She was plump, in her 50s. She had left one curler to dangle at the back of her head this morning. "If it's a tragedy to you, this is the first I've heard of it." She swatted at him with a menu. "Why didn't you speak up 20 years ago, lady killer?" Jason sat. Jennifer put a glass of water in front of him. "And who is this fine gentleman?" "This," said Hedwig, joining, "is my son's great-grandfather's great-great-nephew." "That's a lot of greats. Any great-great-great-whatever of Hedwig is great by me." She giggled at her own wit. "I'll be back for your orders." Hedwig swatted her rear end with a menu as she left. He made small talk about the bistro, the specials, what was good, the Benedict, or not so, the hanger steak. When their orders came, coffee for both, eggs for Jason, a scone for himself, he got down to business. "I met your grandmother about, a year ago. Valerie and I have a mutual interest in old families, particularly old families related to the legend for obvious reasons. Valerie's lived in Tarrytown for years, though her family's up near Boston. Now don't worry, I don't believe all that nonsense about a headless horseman. Valerie's the superstitious one, but the Van Brunts are definitely the family in Irving's story. Hermanus Van Brunt and his wife Agatha were farmers in the village back in 1780 or so. This was during the Revolution. Hermanus grabbed title to lands left by a Tory family who'd been tarred and feathered and shipped back to Britain. Do you know your history? Sure, Tory, loyal to the king. Benjamin Franklin broke with his own son who was a Tory. Smart boy. Traitors to the cause, and that was serious business. The British marched straight through here during the war, chased George Washington off Manhattan and out to New Jersey. And after they were kicked out again, a lot of Tories were kicked out with them. Anyway, the Van Brunts took over some farmland north of Tarrytown. They had a son, Abraham, and, of course, their son Abraham married a wealthy heiress, Katrina Van Tassel. Yes, all that is true. It's public record, just like the legend says. My mother left behind quite a few documents written by Abraham Van Brunt, Brom, in Dutch mostly. He was powerful around here. With Katrina's money, he became the biggest stone merchant in the state. He died in 1850. After him, it's Dylan Van Brunt, his son Joseph, the grandson, then Cornelius, then... Sorry, genealogy is Not my thing. No? Why was Eliza doing research on the Van Brunts? She wasn't. She was looking into the Cranes. That's what made us such fast friends. I don't get it. We do go back a ways, your family and mine. More coffee? Jennifer appeared at Jason's elbow. Hedwig nodded, and she poured. Still not getting it, said Jason. But he did. Hedwig turned to the waitress, and Jason knew what he would say. My lady, may I present? He raised his coffee cup, proclaiming, the last descendant of Ichabod Crane.